Hey guys, so it's me, Mike Taylor. So for ARC 252, building information modeling, I know that I said that I would do a couple of these sessions for us here, so apologies for the lateness, but I figured it was a good time as any to get them done. So had a couple of additions to this list, and I figured I would do these first. So a couple of questions about ceilings. So I'm just going to do I'll try and make a short tutorial about how to generate some ceilings using the automatic ceiling or the sketch ceiling command. Uh, and I think just in terms of getting to our best in town office, making sure that everybody has the tools that they need to get to that level of detail for the drawings. I'm not asking for perfection when it comes to the reflected ceiling plan. There are no dimensions in that RCP, but I want you to use your best judgment and get them as close as we can to the reference, so the best in town reference drawing. So why don't we go ahead and let's get started here. I'll show you starting with the reference drawings, and then we can maybe jump into Revit. Share my screen. So this is, of course, our floor plan, and what I wanted to do first was just to jump into the Bluebeam file itself. So let's just jump into the PDF so we can take a look at what we're trying to get to. So I know we did this in class together, but like I said, there were a couple people that said, hey, can we just cover a couple of these things real quick? And so if you see my screen, hopefully everybody can, but this is just the RCP. So this is on page 5 of our RCP is reflected ceiling plan. So reflected ceiling plan for our best in town office. I've already got most of this done as part of the tutorial model, so I'll share that as well. So what we've got here is just a kind of set of, why don't I draw some boxes here? This is our main floor RCP. We've got a couple of these ceilings here. I'm just going to make this solid so you can see what I'm talking about here. So these zones here are all ceilings, right? So we got little ceiling tiles. And what I've tried to do is repeat these elements as best as we can, just so you're really only making one of these and then kind of copying them over. That is what we're going to get to is a sketch ceiling, so a sketch ceiling profile. And then I created, so that's these ones. And then why don't I use a different color? And these are actually what we do for the automatic ceilings. We could make them as a sketch ceiling as well, but why don't I just make this a blue here? This is a automatic ceiling because we have what are called the existing walls, right? So we have the existing walls that kind of frame, and we can use that automatic ceiling tool to get there. You might notice we've got also, let's make a little cloud here, these kind of tags. These are just our ceiling tags, and we're actually going to have to load these into the Revit model. So if you don't have them, I'll walk you through the process of loading those ceiling tags into our model itself. You should notice a couple things here. So we've got, if I just zoom in a little bit, a couple things here just to note are this is a 600 by 1200 grid that is a baked in ceiling type inside of Revit. And then this 3000 AFF, which means above finished floor, which is also something we can set. AFF above finished floor. So it's setting essentially a dimension between your reference level. In our case, it's going to be our main floor level and the underside of where the ceiling is sitting. If I jump over here, just our plane. Plane is just, there's just a plain ceiling here. We might consider this like a drywall ceiling. This is just a slightly different variation of a ceiling type. Instead of it being a grid, it's just a flat gypsum wallboard ceiling. And then, of course, we've got a couple other iterations down here. We've got, again, our plain ceiling, but just in a very similar style of it's not done as a closed room. It is done as a kind of sketch ceiling, so there's some gaps in there. One thing I should call attention to is, one thing I'll walk us through is that you should, in my opinion, for this exercise and for the reference model here, we can see just in the distance here, this is actually our structural framing. So this is our structural framing. So hopefully, if you've got this already in your model, make that a little bigger. This is our structural framing of the building. So we should be able to see this. Just in this instance, we don't always show the structure, but for me, I thought it might be helpful if we kind of see the structure in our reflected ceiling plan or RCP. Just for this exercise, you won't necessarily have to do it in every drawing, but I think that just as a starting point, it's helpful to see some of these beams just for us as we're drawing this little ceiling in here. So why don't we go ahead and I'm going to pop open Revit now with the kind of the base model of what we should have done by the time, this should have been for last week, but I'm going to walk through some of these processes again. So let's just pop open our Revit model here. This is the main floor, of course, but I've got the main floor open here in our project browser, the main floor level. And so what we can do is we're actually going to need to do a ceiling plan, so a reflected ceiling plan. And if you don't remember how to do that, we'll jump over here to our project browser, and you can see here we've got the floor plans, we've got ceiling plans, we got 3D views. We're trying to get to a ceiling plan, right? So we need to make a ceiling plan. And you'll notice right now we've got the basement floor level and the roof level. So these don't really help us. We need to get the reflected ceiling plan for the main level. And the way that we get that there is you can see if I double click on the floor level, for the basement floor level, there's nothing here. This is just our basement. What we need to get to, much like our best in town office example, is that we need to get to the main floor level. So our offices and our, little other rooms on the main floor. So how do we do that? You can see here on the left, we're missing that. So the way we get there is we're going to come over here to our view ribbon up at the top, click view, and then you should notice under the create panel, see a little create here, create panel here, we've got this little drop down menu here. So this says plan views. We're just going to click the drop down here and it's going to say, would you like to create a floor plan? Would you like to create a reflected ceiling plan, a structural plan, a plan region, an area plan? What we're interested in is creating a reflected ceiling plan, which is of course the second one. So if we go ahead and we just click the reflected ceiling plan button, like that, we can see here that Revit has automatically said, okay, you want to make a reflected ceiling plan or a ceiling plan in this case. Great. We can see already that there are one level. It happens to be the level that we don't have a reflected ceiling plan for. And I'm going to do this again slowly, just so you can see the idea of why this might be important. We've got down here, it says this little checkbox says do not duplicate existing views. You may want to have an additional plan, an additional floor plan, an additional ceiling plan. And how we might do that is actually just unchecking this box and you'll see all of our levels. So all of our levels that we've set emerge within this little menu for our RCP. So you can see on the left here, we've already got a basement floor level. We don't need to make that one. We've already got a roof level. We don't need to make that one. So we just check this. It's going to say, okay, main floor level. Cool. That's what we want. For us, for this semester, I imagine we're not going to have to make too many duplicate views, but let's keep an eye on that. You may need to use that tool in future sessions. I just want everybody to be aware that there is a way to generate additional plans of the same floor, and that might be useful for things like you only want to see the structure, or you only want to see bathrooms, or you only want to see certain elements, and we can control those elements as we use this tool. So back to ceilings. Do not duplicate existing views. We want to generate it for the main floor level here. One last small step, but if you do get, if you are curious and you hit the edit type, this little edit type here, this is going to give us a little bit of information for how we're going to do the call out tags on the overall reflected ceiling plan itself. So if I were you, probably wouldn't touch any of this. Just if you do get into this type family, what we're going to do is either hit cancel, hit OK. Don't change anything. We're cool for now. We haven't talked at all about view templates, so let's leave that off for now. So just hit OK and hit OK again. And then what we're going to do is this is going to generate for us the reflected ceiling plan. So in my example, unfortunately, I have already done one step that you haven't done in this case. And that is to turn on our structural framing. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to undo it and then I'm going to redo it. So if your screen doesn't look exactly like mine, what I'm going to do now is show you why that is. So we hopefully have some semblance of these little structural members in here. So if you participated in the structural class, you should have some of these 610G joist girders. The spacing doesn't really matter. We're just trying to get an idea of what the spacing might be. We're not structural engineers yet. If anybody is looking at structural engineering, we're not structural engineers yet. So I want to encourage us to kind of just have an idea of how to demonstrate using those structural pieces. So how do we get the structural members, so these little structural beams, to turn on or turn off inside of our model? And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn thin lines back off. So we'll have our regular lines showing up. So remember, thin lines up here in our quick access toolbar, hit that little thin lines. And what we can see now, we've got everything kind of comes back in. So first thing we'll do is let's look at our visibility graphics. So if you remember in our view tab here, in our view ribbon rather, in our graphics panel, we've got this little handy dandy visibility graphics, the shortcut for which is you type VG on your keyboard. It's a pretty advanced function, but I do want to just show you one thing. So I'll show you one thing with this just so we can see how the visibility graphics works. This is very similar to how you might control the visibility of an AutoCAD file, except that instead of using layers, we are using our categories, our type families, and all these other components within the actual Revit interface to give us what we see on our screen. What do we want to do? We want to turn, I'm going to show you how to turn off, and then I will turn back on our structural framing members. So all these little members here. So likely your screen will look something I'm going to show you. So hit that little visibility graphics underneath. Remember, we got view, visibility graphics. Click on that, and you're going to get, you guessed it, another menu. So we've got menus here, and there's a couple different ways to filter this menu. For us, all I want you to do, scroll down. We're going to look for that big S, S for structural, come all the way down here, and you'll see this handy dandy little, in the visibility column, we'll see this handy dandy structural framing. There's a little checkbox there. What I want you to do is if it's off, turn it on. And mine looks correct, but I just want to show you what this looks like. So for us, let's just turn this off so you can see. Boom. All of my structure has turned off, right? So all of my structural framing, all of those beams are off. They're not gone. They still exist. So I want this to be clear is that we are just controlling what's called the visibility graphics. So how are we controlling what we see on this specific view in this specific case? Really important. All of the geometry, everything that is in the BIM model, inside of the Revit model, exists still. We haven't deleted anything. We haven't messed with anything. We've just taking a look at turning on or off the objects within this particular view. Geometry still exists. So what I want to do is likely when you opened up your model, if you created that ceiling plan, we want to see those beams. So for the reference example, we want to see those beams. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody could follow along. So in this example, we've got now we've got nothing on. What we'll do is we'll turn those things back on. So turning things on and off using the visibility graphics, you will do this all the time with all sorts of different parts of a model. And what we've got here is let's just jump back in to our visibility graphics, and we'll go ahead and we'll turn that structural system back on. So I want you to go ahead and do that. We'll grab visibility graphics here, click that. We're going to scroll down all the way to structural framing, and you'll see now that that box is empty. So if you do get a little lost, a little confused, if you click down here, you can see all of this stuff. Oh my goodness. So let's just keep that closed for now. It's like opening Pandora's box. So we'll leave that, just hit that little negative, and we'll come back to structural framing here. Click inside that box, little check mark emerges, hit apply, and everything is back on. This should be about what our model looks like. Just making sure that everybody's on the same page, the same starting page, so it goes. So what do we want to do now? So we can imagine that this is the reflected ceiling plan, and this is if our plans are cut at a certain elevation in 3D space, the cut across looking down, the reflected ceiling plan is cut in 3D space across the plan view and looking up. right? So just to be clear, we're looking up in this view. So really commonly, I would say that it's pretty normal, pretty common to have a reflected ceiling plan open when you meant to open a floor level and vice versa. So how do you identify the differences? Well, one way is that whatever view is open in our interface is going to be highlighted bold in the project browser. So we can see here that our main floor level is highlighted bold and it's underneath our ceiling plan. So we know we're in the right view. All good. So how do we get a ceiling in here? We're going to jump over to the ribbon for architecture, so the architecture ribbon. Click that, and we got all our tools, right? So just like anything within Revit, what we need to do is get to the ceiling tool. You guessed it. So the ceiling tool over here inside the build panel. And what we're going to go ahead and why don't we just click that, see what we get. So if I just hover over for 1 second, it's going to show me this is how we use the ceiling panel, ceiling tool. Click that, and then we're going to get a couple options. We'll just go through those. So let's just click ceiling here. And the first thing I want you to notice in the green means go, our little modify ceiling panel over here. So ceiling panel, we can see automatic and sketch. So there's two different ways to create ceilings. And the first one, the automatic one, it's really Revit is going to look for the room boundary. So an example here, why don't I just come over here to grid lines between grid lines 4 and 5. If I just zoom in a little bit, we should see how that highlights red. So what it's doing is Revit is saying to me, are you sure this is where you want the ceiling, right? So it's saying we got the exterior wall and we got our walls on the east and west, and then we have the wall adjacent on the south. And it's saying, I see this as a room. Would you like to have an automatic ceiling here? And what we can do here is I'm just going to quickly make a different ceiling so that we can see it in real time. So if we want to come over to the type selector, I encourage you just to come over to the type selector. And before we place our ceiling, let's just pick one that might have a little bit more stuff in it so we can see. So I want you to hit the type selector. Let's do the 600 by 1200 grid. This should be baked into our model. Should be baked into our model. So let's just click that. And then see a couple of our constraints here. Really the only thing with the automatic ceiling, it's already picked our exterior kind of condition for how we're going to generate the ceiling, but you can pick your height offset. You can do it now, you can change it later. So you can see here the height offset, that is what we see in our reference drawing as the AFF, or above finished floor. So if I just jump back quick to ARC 252 here, we can see here we've got, this is unfortunate, we got a plain 3300 above finished floor. So we'll get to that, but I think an important thing here, we can definitely say 3300 above finished floor. And why don't we go ahead and we'll populate our little height offset from level to be 3300. Whoops. So just get in here to our text box. You can type 3300. Then we just jump over. We can see that 3300 is set. And then we can click this is our boundary. And if we click, we should see ceiling. So I've just clicked once, and you can see how Revit is still live. We're still live in the tool, And this is a very quick way to automatically assign ceilings in rooms that have closed boundaries. So you can just jump across and select any number of these. And you can see how I'm just kind of hovering, and then I click, right? Magical. Right, so now I've got all these ceilings everywhere. Sure. That is an automatic ceiling. So what it's doing is it's giving us, again, back to the idea of the room boundary, and then it's generating the ceiling from that. So I'm just going to go ahead and I should say this. So anywhere outside of the building, you can see anywhere that Revit cannot place a ceiling, you can see it's searching, right? It's searching for a ceiling to place. It's going to give us that, big X, like you cannot put a ceiling outside of the building. There are no automatic ceilings that are available in this space. So I'm going to go ahead and you can either click modify or you can double tap escape. And now we are outside of the ceiling tool. It's just a couple things I want us to cover here when it comes to the ceiling itself. So we can see here, if I go ahead and click on the whole ceiling here. Click on the whole ceiling. So I'm hitting tab there, just if you heard my tab button there. So you're going to tab, 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 and then select. the way that you can see, ceilings can be tough to select. So you're going to try and find an edge. Trying to find an edge. You can see here it's trying to select the window. But what I can do is I hit tab. And now in the bottom left, we'll see ceilings, compound ceilings, 600 by 1200, right? Let's go ahead. I can click that. And now I can reset anything that I need to do. I can change the ceiling type if I wanted to. I can do all of these things. So one thing that I should point out is that if you did, for instance, want to change this to a different type of ceiling, we can see just baked into the default Revit template. The architecture template is 600 by 600 grid. So why don't I just go ahead, I'll show you what that looks like. Right, so doubling up the number of lines there. 600 by 1200, the kind of pretty standard 2x4 grid, we call that. So 2x4 feet, or 600 by 1200 if you're looking at millimeters. Plain, so plain is our gypsum. So just a standard gypsum ceiling here. And then generic, which is just a plain generic ceiling. I would try and avoid using this one if you can. You're really going to stick to these three. And for best in town, we're just looking at actually two of these, the 600 by 1200 and the plain. Hold that thought. I'm going to grab this 600 by 1200 here. And right now, that just means the type selector is now chosen. We've got our 600 by 1200 grid. If you wanted to modify anything, you want to create a new ceiling, very similar to our wall tool, our window tool, any of these type parameters. So right now, inside of our properties palette, we've got these what are called the instance parameters, right? So these are all instantaneous instance of pieces of the building. They're instantaneous, they are instances. So it's every piece we could set separately, an instance. If we wanted to edit the overall type parameter of this family, what we can do is we can jump up here to our edit type command, click that. Very similar to our wall tool, our roof tool. You might see some pretty familiar pieces here. We've got structure, right? We've got structure here. And this is really where we would go to edit our overall ceiling thicknesses. So ceilings, of course, also have assemblies. So for the purposes of best in town, we're not going to edit any of the structures themselves, but I want you guys to see that you do have the ability to come in here and modify some of the thicknesses of the components of the ceiling itself. So if I just come in here and hit edit, we should see a couple different things here. We've got, recognizing the core boundaries. So core boundaries, you can see here the structure is sitting between those core boundaries. I don't know, just give us a little preview here. And we can see that it's just a little ceiling. So the first component here, the structure this little gray area, and the finish, little finish. This is pretty conventional, not particularly detailed part of a ceiling. So one thing we might do is just so you can see this is if we remember in the actual hatch pattern. So our hatch pattern right now references this 600 by 1200 grid. That's where it's referencing it from. So everything is somehow connected inside of Revit. So we've got this ceiling tile itself, and that's represented here. So if I click this ellipsis, for whatever reason, if we wanted to modify this, we can click that ellipsis here, and we can change this to something else. So you can see here, we've got all of our project materials. So if I just was to go ahead and change it to 600 by 600, that would be confusing, but we would be able to identify in our little graphics here. So we can see the foreground pattern is a hatch of 600 by 600. So we can change any of that. We can mess with it. We don't need to mess with any of this stuff for Best in Town, but I do want you to see this interface. So you're going to see it, hang out with it. If you really hate how dark this black is, you can modify it to maybe a less dark color. You can make it 90% gray, something like this, and that will update inside of every piece of this 600 by 1200 compound ceiling family. So for now, we're just going to hit cancel. I don't want to confuse anybody, but that's how you get there. It's pretty deep. We're pretty deep in the system. Cancel again. Let's just cancel out of this. So that all being said, that is our automatic ceiling. One thing that I do want to also go over is when we look at, this is the actual hatch pattern itself of the ceiling. So what we can do is we can actually move this. So this gets a little, I don't want to say tricky, but it's a little strange. If I wanted to modify where this ceiling pattern starts or finishes, however, whatever language you like to choose, we can do that. And right now it's starting such that it's centered on the room, right? So our actual hatch pattern for this entire assembly here is centered on the room itself. And what I can do here is if I click on the horizontal element here, I can actually come up to my move command, click move, move this all the way to the edge. And you'll see that whole pattern update. Pretty neat. So, if you're somebody who doesn't want to center your ceiling grid on the room, you feel free to do that. I would argue that normally you do keep it in the center, but I leave it to you as designers, as part of an enterprise. If somebody asks you to do it this way, certainly you can do it. So you can move it horizontally as well. So if I just, again, I'm going to click on one of the kind of hatched elements here and click move. Same thing, move it here. Maybe I want to line it up to a grid line. It's going to snap, boom. Pretty clean, lines up with my grid line. Maybe that's cool. Maybe we want to get really fancy. Maybe we want to rotate the whole grid. And what we can do here is if we hit this little rotate in our modify panel, again, rotate. What if I want to rotate it? It'll snap for us to 45 degrees for whatever reason. What you want to do, we've got a rotated grid. This has nothing to do with best in town, just showing you the tool, making sure everybody is up to speed on what this can do, what it will do if you ask it. Great. Next up, we've got, let's see if we can get to the sketch ceiling command. So right now, I'm going to rotate this back just so you can see we can also rotate it back to 0. Rotate it back to 45. And I know that you know that I know from our ARC 252 best in town office example that that ceiling, in fact, is a plane ceiling. So let's just jump back in here and we can do 3,300. So remember, see what we got. So this is now even more complicated. I'm going to hit tab again, and to highlight it, go to the type selector. We're going to go to plane here. Plane can be pretty hard to see. So this is something that I did during class that I think is helpful. If you don't have tags yet inside ceiling tags yet inside your model, it can be really hard to see where you have or haven't placed ceilings. So the easiest thing is to just place another ceiling, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So let's do that. Architecture, ceiling, compound ceiling, we want plane. Let's go ahead and let's hit this again. And we should see a little error that says there are identical instances in the same place. Thanks, Revit. So why did you let me place it? There's no warning before you do it, so that can be a little frustrating, as some things in Revit can be. So let's just hit that X, and we'll undo that. So I just undid it super quick. What I find helpful temporarily, what we can do is we can adjust. I'm going to show you back to our visibility graphics. This can be really helpful in the office. I'm going to do this for us. You do not have to do it this way, but it's a useful tip when I'm doing ceilings. This obviously it's really hard to see. Whoops. It's really hard to see that our ceiling is active inside this room. So what I like to do is set up our visibility graphics to show us, is the ceiling on or is it off? Have you placed the ceiling here? And what we can do is jump over to the view ribbon, come back to our visibility graphics, click that. And I want you to find ceilings. It should be here. Should be here inside of our ceilings here. And what we can do is we can actually set, if we just click in this white open box here, we're actually going to set up a solid color for the ceilings to be represented as. This is similar to something like changing the layers, but again, we're not changing the layers, we're changing the overall category inside of Revit. So anything that's a ceiling, the pattern for that ceiling will be what we're going to set it. So I'll show you what that looks like. So you can see here, I'm just kind of hovering over here. I'm going to click on our ceilings, and then you'll see this kind of override. We're just going to override it temporarily. We're going to come back and turn this off, but I just want you to see this. If you get stuck come talk to me. But I think that this tutorial is meant to kind of give us the tools that we need to get this job done. So hit that little override. We're going to get all these extra fun menus. We're deep in it now. So first thing we're going to do is foreground. Let's just do a little drop down here, and you'll see all of these pattern types. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a solid fill. So the first step here in our pattern, make a solid fill, and we'll pick a color that we think makes sense. So we can click on this, and it's going to give us a whole range of color selections. I'm going to jump over here. Let's pick a nice little fuchsia, nice little pink in here. Hit OK. And do the same thing with our background. Let's do solid fill, and we'll try and simulate the same. Doesn't really matter. This is just for the purposes of the demonstration. So let's just close enough. Not the exact one, but that's okay. Hit OK. And now you'll see the patterns have updated inside of our visibility graphics. And now once we hit apply or OK, or apply and then OK, you should see everything populate. So, just as a starting point, it can be really challenging to see all of our ceilings. So I do encourage you to, if you're unclear, if things are, you can't see where you're, especially with plane ceilings, it's hard to see. With the pattern, it's pretty straightforward. So you can usually see where our patterns, of course, have disappeared in this iteration because I made everything. The override is now solid. So we've lost all our patterns. But if we're just trying to get ceilings in here, I find this can be helpful, especially with plane ceilings. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to undo all that. So I'm going to show you how to undo it. Say after you've selected all of your ceilings, you can come back in and turn this off. So it's just what's called a temporary override. We can come back in here and undo that. Very simple. We're going to come back into the visibility graphics. Click that. Got to come down to our ceilings here. We're going to click on our, pink boxes. We can see them here, our pink boxes. Click on those. And this is little handy clear overrides. And the clear overrides just clears any override that you may have put as part of this category. Really helpful just to clean up go back to what it was. Just go back to the standard default, hit that clear. You'll see no overrides here. You're good to go. Hit OK. Hit apply. Everything's back to normal. So it's up to you. Just as a tool, it's up to you. It can be helpful just to make sure you can see those ceilings as we're going through it. And why don't we just go ahead and we will jump into the sketch tool here. So let's jump into the sketch, and if we jump to architecture ribbon and then go over back to our ceiling tool here. So jump to our ceiling tool, click ceiling, click it. And now the difference in this exercise is that we do really want to get to sketch the ceiling rather than automatic, which again takes the walls. It's going to let us draw basically a frame or a zone, a loop where we would like to have a ceiling. Again, I haven't given us dimensions, so I encourage you to try this out. It does not have to be perfect. Let's jump back to the example here. And why don't we just start with, we'll start with this one. Why don't we start with this one? Let's give ourselves, just so you guys can see. We're going to start with this little zone here, and then we're going to copy them over. So I'll start with this, and let's make sure that everything kind of shakes out for our little ceiling here. Okay, so back to Revit. Let's try and draw in this zone here. So again, make sure you've got sketch ceiling, and you'll see the menu change from automatic to sketch. And now we have a interface, much like our floor interface, much like our roof interface, where we are drawing a boundary. We're drawing a boundary for the extent of the ceiling. So roughly, I'm not going to hold you guys to this. So we can see we've got just in front of the window all the way to the edge of kind of this line. There's a line across the front face of the elevator all the way to the front face of the fire stair. So let's use that as our kind of rough guesstimate here. And again, just a little bit, so our second or so beam here. So let's just jump in here. Going to come up here. We know we're going to do a little rectangle. Rectangle is a closed loop, so we do have to remember that our boundaries need to be closed loops in order for Revit to recognize that we're trying to draw a ceiling here. So there's a couple things we're going to set. Let's start with our boundary. Click on that little rectangle tool here. Let's just start it out. We can draw any direction. I'm just going to start in our top right here, and I'm going to drag it left. You can see now it's going to try and snap to the front face of my elevators here, which is great. So why don't we just do that? Again, we don't have dimensions, so let's just click somewhere here, click once, click twice, and now we've got our closed loop. Second thing we got to do is make sure that we select the right ceiling. So for us, we're going to be using that 600 by 1200 grid. Let's come over here to the type selector, click down, 600 by 1200 millimeter grid. We won't see any update yet, but that's okay. So what we want to do is we just want to tell Revit, this is what we want. What else do we need to do? We need to set the height offset. So let's just double check this. Check the height offset in here. We got 3000 instead of 3300. We can set that now, or we can set it afterwards, but let's just set it now. Hit apply here. And then we just got to finish the sketch. So when we finish a sketch, what that means is it's just creating the geometry. So if I come up here and hit our little checkbox here, that is our finish edit mode. And that's just going to close us out of the tool. It's going to generate a little ceiling for us. So let's go ahead and do that. Hit the little green check mark. And we should, with any luck, hopefully you've got the same thing as I do on my screen, we should have this wonderful little cloud, this great little cloud on our screen of this 600 by 1200 grid. Make sure we got the right orientation here. Looking reasonable, looking all right. So again, don't worry too much about the way that the dimensions here. Not going to take any marks off for that. We just want an idea of how to demonstrate the use of that tool. So again, just to remember, our sketch tool is a little bit different. I would say it's much simpler to be able to identify where the edge of our roof is. If I just, the edge of our ceiling is. If I just kind of hover over, you'll see it kind of flash. And in the bottom left, we got ceilings, compound ceiling, 600 by 1200. I can click, all good, right? So if we just, we wanted to say duplicate these, I do not need to draw a second set of ceilings for between grid lines 2 and 3. In fact, what I'm going to do is try and be clever. Hopefully you guys can follow along here. We can copy elements. So we're actually going to copy the ceiling from grid line 2 over to grid line 3. So let's just go ahead and do that. Click on the ceiling itself. Remember, in our modify panel, we've got our little copy command. Click once, and then I'm going to just click on our grid line 2 and drag all the way over to grid line 3, right? Yeah, let's do that for now. And hit our little modify or double tap escape and get out of the tool. Looking like we're getting pretty close here, right? So we've got, what else do we got to do? So we might want to mirror the ceiling. So rather than copy, what we can do is we're actually going to mirror. So much like in AutoCAD, we can mirror instead of just shapes, we can mirror entire geometries. And if I go ahead and I click on our ceiling here, I can jump up to our little mirror command. If you guys haven't used this is a great little tool. So mirror pick axis. So the pick axis tool is going to let us just pick an axis somewhere that we're going to mirror this ceiling geometry to. So if we click mirror pick axis, click that, and I'm really just going to click our grid line 2 here, and it should just mirror it. Magical, right? I'm going to double tap escape for us. Now we're halfway there. We got our ceiling hanging out. Lastly, I'm going to just copy. Remember, control is going to add. I'm going to copy these two pieces from grid line 2 to grid line 3. So let's just go ahead and do that. Again, one more step. Copy grid line 2 to grid line 3. A little messy. That's okay. Again, just trying to get the ceilings in here. So a little messy. You can see how it's a little tight on one side. So one thing we might want to do is move that the edge, that boundary on the east side. We might want to move it a little off of the wall. So it's not a perfect geometry copy, but let's just come up here. If we want to edit that ceiling, we can jump up here to our little edit boundary, click that, and then come over here to the little pink line here, this little sketch line. And why don't we just move it off of our wall? We'll move it by, let's call it 600, 2 feet or so. And then just come back up, finish edit, and now we've got a wonderful set of ceilings. So one thing you'll notice is that now, for whatever reason, our panel pattern has actually been adjusted for some reason. I can't say exactly why. Revit's done something funky when we did that mirror. And one thing that you will find yourself in the office, this is something that I have done on projects, we want to use the align tool. And the align tool will let us align the patterns between these kind of elements. Rather than starting over, we can just line up the patterns. So we can see here the first kind of tranche, the first little ceiling panel here, looks pretty good. And what we can do is we'd like to align this line with this line. Looks a little weird, right? We want to kind of get this lined up with this. And remember that this pattern can be moved. So we can do this a couple ways. I'm going to show you the best way. I think it makes the most sense is to use this little, in the modify panel, we're going to use this little align tool. And the way that this works is we're going to click the thing first that we would like to align to. So I'm going to click align. So I'd like to align to this. So let's click this little center of our panel, click once, and then let's pick this little line in the center here, and let's see what happens. Boom, done, right? So tool is still active. We can do it again with this one over here. So click once, boom, magical. So that little align tool can save you a lot of time, save you a lot of frustration. We're now just aligning a couple things with our overall ceiling. So I think that makes a lot of sense. If I just, again, double tap escape, getting pretty close to what our best in town example looks like. Right, we've got a couple ceilings here. There are, again, just these plain ceilings at the base here. And why don't we just go ahead and we can make those elements. Back into Revit. We just got to make something like these ceilings. So we'll come back up to architecture. Did I make them the same elevation? Let's just double check that. So yep, so they're all 3000. Let's come over here to architecture, go to the ceiling tool. We're going to set that to 3000. The difference is we're going to modify inside of the type selector tool. We're going to make this a plane ceiling. So plane, remember, automatic versus sketch. In this case, we're going to need to sketch the ceiling. So let's click that sketch command, sketch, and now let's just go ahead and make a couple just little, we're gonna guess. We're gonna guess about what it is. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's around here. So let's just make something that makes sense. Make a little rectangle. Again, it's got to be closed loop. Click once. We got this wonderful little sketch of our ceiling. To finish the sketch, we're going to come up here and we're going to hit this little green check mark, hit that green check mark for the finish edit, and let's finish that edit up. And we should see a wonderful plane ceiling stretch across from, what are these grid lines? Grid lines, basically mid grid line 1 and 2, all the way to grid line 4. Check mark, boom, done. Looking good, feeling fine, good. Last one. Got this little piece down here. So we can do this a couple of different ways. If we just want to draw a new ceiling, we totally could. I'm just going to go ahead and copy it, and then I'll modify the overall boundary of the ceiling. So let's go ahead and do that. So to copy it, we're going to come over here to the modify panel, click our copy command, and then I just need to find a reference point. For me, it's probably going to make sense to craft the same amount of space between these ceilings. So let's go ahead and do that. You can see here, now our ceiling is quite visibly outside of our building. And what we want to do is move that edge just a little bit inside the building, like our example. So let's go back. And if I just hit our modify here, this little modify arrow, or double tap escape. So you can double tap escape. We're out of the tool. And what I'd like to do is come back in here, just hover over our ceiling. And we're going to edit that boundary. You should see edit boundary kind of populate up in our modify menu here. So edit boundary, click once. Let's just go ahead and we'll just move this up. So the move command up in our modify panel, click move. Somewhere inside, checkbox, good to go. So yeah, so these are just some example tools. I think that you guys should be able to put a couple ceilings in here. Try your best to follow along with the kind of the existing best in town example here. So do your best to get these families in here. We really only got two families, the 600 by 1200 and the plane. And the last thing we'll do is actually give these annotation. So if we do need to give these an annotation, I believe that the default template model does not have the ceiling tag loaded. So make sure that you've gone ahead and you've downloaded the ceiling tag from Blackboard. So Blackboard has the ceiling tags. All of the families are set up on Blackboard to download and then insert into our models. If you can't find it, it is within the annotations within Revit. So if you can't find it, come talk to me. But for now, I'll just show you. I've got my kind of families all organized in just for the best in town. So just for the best in town example, in that way, what we can do is we can come up to our insert and we just want to load the family here. So if I just want to load the family, I've got all of my families inside of here. And where is my ceiling type? Interesting, interesting. So potentially it's not in here. Well, in my head it was in here, but potentially that looks like that is not the case. Maybe I just don't see it. So here's what we're going to do. I believe it's already in here. So let's go ahead and we'll use the tool and then I'll go back and I'll show you how to load it. So annotate. And what we need to do is tag by category. So to tag by category, you're going to come over to the annotate ribbon, tag by category. Yeah, so it's already live in here. You can kind of see it jumping around a little bit, but this is a ceiling tag. I'm going to double check that it is in fact on Blackboard before I post this video, so you shouldn't have any issues. You can see here, there's a couple things that are happening. It's jumping around a little bit, and what we want to do is modify this. Let's just turn off the leader line here, and you can see now it's a little closer to what I was trying to get for us in our best in town. We just come over here and it's just highlighting automatically what our pieces of ceiling are here. So if I just place it, I can move it afterwards. A little move icon there. Click again. So every time I click, I'm generating the tag for my ceiling. So for us, you can see how quick this can happen, right? So annotations are a huge bonus inside of Revit to get these things up to speed pretty quick. And one thing you'll see is, I'll just give you an example here. If I was to try and modify, say this, instead of 3000, I wanted it to be 2800. You can't see it, but it's all automated such that that tag didn't change. Not only did the tag change, the geometry also changed. I'm just going to undo that. Okay, one thing that I should do is show you guys how to load in that family. So first thing I'm going to do is let's just come in here. You guys don't need to see this, but I'll just do this anyways. Edit family file, save as. I'm just going to save the family somewhere. It's in there. No, it's not. I'm just going to save it this way. So M ceiling tag with height. I'm just going to save this. You have to worry too much about this, but I'm just going to show you how to load it. Save. Cool. Close that. Just so you know, if the tag is not live inside of your drawings, you will have it on Blackboard. You'll be able to go to the Blackboard site and download that ceiling tag. Should be live inside of the family component of Revit. Like, you should be able to load the family, but it may not be live inside of your default template, your architectural template. So if it's not, what we can do is we're actually going to jump up over here to the insert, and we're going to load insert ribbon. We'll load the family. So we can load the family, and here we can see metric M ceiling tag with height. And all you're going to do is just hit open, and then it should be, I already got it in here. That's cool. You can overwrite it if you need to overwrite. And just means it's live in our drawing. And again, the way that we get to that is annotate, and then we're actually going to tag by category. So tagging by category is it's saying, okay, the category is the ceiling, and then we can tag it, and you can see how I've got all these categories labeled now within my Best in Town office example. There are no lights. I should clarify. There are no lights inside of the Best in Town. I thought it was best to kind of keep it simple. In other iterations, we might look at the actual light fixture, the components that we can place inside of the ceilings themselves. But for this example, I just wanted us to kind of get more familiar with using the command for getting our ceilings into the drawing. So I hope that was helpful. I'm going to make sure in my notes here that I've got everything covered. I believe that's good enough for now. So again, I haven't done all the ceilings inside of our little model here, but this should be a good enough start, and you should be able to finish up the rest of the ceilings per the Best in Town office example. And then, yeah, so if I don't, I'm going to see you on Tuesday. And in the meantime, I'm going to try and do an additional tutorial on curtain wall if that's something that you'd like to see. I'm going to try and post it today. So let's see how far we can get. Thank you everybody for hanging out. If you did stick it out through this whole thing, if you have questions, of course, email me or shoot me a note. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay.